how a woman's touch is changing the face of crime fighting for the better. Plus, it's broke. Now the state's working on how to fix it. Unemployment insurance, that is. But first, the end of the COVID state of emergency in Kansas. It's more than just about unmasking. That's what we're talking about right now on Kansas Week. This is Kansas Week, and I'm your host, Pilar Pedraza. Welcome back after a 2-week hiatus. Little more than a third of Kansans are fully vaccinated against COVID, and new variants are on the rise. But the state of emergency is over. KAKE's Hannah Baker takes a look at why and what this means for you.
I feel like they should wait a little bit to have that expired.
I think it's a very needed, necessary program, and if anything, it looked like they'd be trying to add to something instead of taking from it.
The Kansas disaster declaration is coming to an end because top lawmakers made the decision to let it expire instead of reconvening to extend it. This comes a day after Governor Laura Kelly proposed rescinding 7 different pandemic emergency orders, but saying without a disaster declaration in place, we undermine our ability to achieve these priorities and objectives. We owe it to Kansans to finish the job and wind down the state of disaster emergency responsibly. Political expert Dr. Russell Arbin Fox says he thinks this was an attempt to urge Republican lawmakers to keep the order in place.
She said in her statement that, decisions about how to deal with the pandemic shouldn't be political. But of course, here in Kansas, as well as pretty much everywhere else in the United States, all of the decisions about how to deal with the pandemic have always been political.
The declaration provides lots of different federal resources to help aid during the pandemic, including COVID-19 testing and vaccinations, support for food banks, and provides hospitals and first responders with PPE.
That's extremely unfortunate. The declaration is not really supposed to be political. It shouldn't be political. It's just a tool that is contemplated by the state of Kansas to allow us to provide resources to the locals.
But with the expiration of the order quickly approaching, Attorney General Derek Schmidt says public health issues related to the pandemic remain, but the emergency is ending.
And to help us dig into these issues, we have here on set State Representative Stephanie Byers, a Wichita Democrat, and joining us by Zoom, State Representative Troy Waymaster, a Republican from Bunker Hill. Thank you both so much for joining us. And Troy, since I've got you up there right now, I'm going to start with you. The practicalities of this decision to rescind the order, what are the biggest changes Kansans should be dealing with at this point?
Well, as far as, I don't know about the biggest changes, but I would like to go back to where in that previous segment there, the governor had said that this was political, and I don't think it was, because they had a legislative coordinating council meeting a while ago where the governor had asked to extend it for another 30 days. Then they extended it until June 15th, and then she asked for another extension. And I think it was just the lawmakers on the legislative coordinating council have said, we need to start winding down this emergency order. As far as the changes, I think a lot of things have been going back to what we can say a sense of normalcy in the past few months. I mean, obviously, a lot of the local forms of government had let the mask mandates lapse in their particular counties or cities. We've seen the economy in the state of Kansas rebound from where we were at a little over a year ago. People are getting vaccinated. It's just, I think we're coming to a point where we need to have the emergency orders end in the state of Kansas, as they have done in other states across the United States.
And Stephanie, for you, what do you think are the biggest things that folks are going to be facing now that we've made this change?
Well, there are things that have come up in all kinds of ways that we don't even think of. When I walked into the studio here today, there's a sign up there on the door that says, if you've been vaccinated, and you go with mask. And I think that a lot of times we've got people that are looking at things going back to normal, but haven't been vaccinated. And we can see the numbers here in Sedgwick County, as low as they are, that we really need to do a better job of getting people vaccinated. And rescinding that emergency order kind of gives the impression that we're no longer in that place. The other thing that concerns me is the possibility of 63,000 families losing their SNAP benefits at a time when their moms and dads are trying to get back to work, and now they're going to be worried not only about getting to work and getting back into their jobs, but also how they're going to make sure that their kids have enough food to eat as well.
Now, I know several of the extra benefits that have been coming down from the federal government are slated to phase out in September or so. So the couple of extra months we're talking about here, how big of a difference do you see that making for folks?
Well, when you talk about timeline and we look at what happens when we get to August and September, and we see, especially for kids, school begins to start up. And with school startup, some of those needs that some of those more challenged kids might have will be filled within that school setting. And so we're putting a gap in there instead of letting it naturally roll into when there would be another place there to take up that responsibility.
Yeah, and Troy, I know that especially when we're talking about SNAP benefits, et cetera, a lot of those do impact Western Kansas quite a bit.
Yes, they do. I mean, actually, during the pandemic last summer, they were providing lunches actually for all 3 meals for students, pretty much all across the state of Kansas. So all of those school-age children are able to have a well-balanced meal during the pandemic. But like I said before, I mean, things have changed drastically since where we were at last year. I mean, I've talked to many employers. I mean, the governor has also met with many businesses across the state of Kansas and also with the Kansas Chamber of Commerce about, lapsing the $300 extra a week unemployment benefits, because so many employers are having problems trying to find individuals to place some of the openings that they have within their businesses. I mean, I have businesses in Russell who have contacted me and have asked me, when is that $300 extra a week unemployment benefit going to end? Because it's being very problematic to try to entice people to apply for jobs that have been open and available for quite some time. Like I said, I mean, I think right now, I don't think we are acknowledging that the COVID-19 pandemic is gone. It's not. I think our lives have changed quite drastically when this was, sprung upon us last March. I'm sure we're going to be acting differently when we're in, different environments. We're going to be doing social distancing. Some individuals will still wear masks. That's going to be their personal prerogative on how they want to move forward. I would say in regards to the vaccinations, for those that have not got vaccinated yet, are probably not going to get vaccinated anyways. So it's time to start winding down the emergency declaration, as I said, as many states across the nation have done, because we are going towards a part of our the last year where it needs to come to an end, and we need to go back to a normal setting.
All right. Well, one of the biggest stories of the state's response to COVID has been the failures of the unemployment insurance system. The effort to fix those problems got its start this last week, as Rebecca Chung of the KSN Capitol Bureau shows us.
The council plans to address what's created a stressful year for many unemployed Kansans. Long call lines, payment delays, and high volumes of fraud. The Department of Labor has blamed these issues on an outdated computer system that will soon be one step closer to getting updated. Sounds like this. Hang up. And this.
Go online to file your claim.
I can't go online.
People making call after call until they can finally get through.
This is my phone record from January 1 till current.
A cry for help after weeks without payments, even erupting into protests, begging the state for a solution.
We're in the middle of a pandemic and a crisis.
There's got to be a solution to the problem.
Now lawmakers and labor officials are taking action, kicking off their first meeting of the Unemployment Improvement Council with a long list of agenda items.
We've been better prepared to address with the frauds had we had a system in place that was already modernized, that we could just do a plug and play.
At the center of a system overhaul is computer upgrades. The department plans to pick a company to work on the project by this summer. The council plans to meet again next week. It's expected to be a lengthy meeting with fraud taking center stage. And one of the items on the table is taking the next steps in choosing an independent auditor to look into how many fraudulent claims have been paid out. At the Capitol, I'm Rebecca Chung.
And that's a big question. There's even some differentiation between the legislative post audit and the Department of Labor on that number, but possibly as much as $600 million is what we're hearing.
Right, and it's hard to know, and I'm sure that when we get the audit going, that's going to help really refine that and define where the fraud exists. But we know when you walk into a computer system that's built in the 70s and have difficulty finding people who can do the maintenance work on it, a system that's been patched up over and over again over the last 40 years, that anytime you make a slight change to it, it breaks something else down. The same as we would with any other machine that we use in our daily lives.
No. Well, and this is not an overnight project.
No, absolutely not. We're talking about something that's so sensitive that's going to take a long time to make sure that every part gets into place and that we don't end up in another position where we're at right now. So it's going to take a while to get the new system up and running.
No. And Troy, as we talk about this issue, I know I've spoken with so many lawmakers who said they've been inundated with emails, and a lot of folks telling me the issue isn't just the computer system. There are other fixes that need to be made as well.
Well, and we had a briefing about this in the House Appropriations Committee. Obviously, Chairman of the Economic Development and Commerce Committee, Sean Tarwater, who is leading this committee, the Special Interim Committee, is on the Appropriations Committee. And that was one thing that we tried to address, is it's not necessarily, yes, the system could be problematic and it could be a cause as to why you're not able to address these claims. The other aspect of it is just pure customer service. I mean, every night I check my legislative email, and I am getting emails on a daily basis, not only from individuals in my district, but individuals from all over the state of Kansas who are having issues and trying to get in contact with somebody in the Department of Labor. And sometimes it might be a duration of 2 weeks since the last time that they spoke with somebody, or maybe even just received an email. And I'm sure Representative Byers has the same issue. I mean, all of us have been receiving all of these emails. And the best thing that we can do is we can forward it on to the Kansas Department of Labor Legislative Unemployment Hotline, is kind of what the email is, and then respond back to our constituents that we have forwarded that on, because even in a way, we're kind of restricted on who we can contact the Department of Labor. That's the outlet that they want to have used, is this email address. And so I'm just constantly forwarding these emails and then letting my constituents, and also letting other people across the state of Kansas that I've tried to assist, and letting them know, like, okay, I forwarded your information to the Department of Labor, and I'll follow up. And I have a spreadsheet that's set up on all the individuals that I have forwarded information on, and I follow up with them if there has not been any resolve to their unemployment issues. The one issue that it's also very problematic is that obviously there's fraudulent claims. And you were kind of talking about that with Representative Byers, is that there's variance between how much was actually paid out. Legislative Post Audit had the audit of $600 to even $800 million possibly. And then now the Department of Labor is saying, no, it was only around $290 million. Well, that's still quite a bit of money that was coming out of the trust fund. When this pandemic started, we had numerous Kansans unemployed. We had a balance in that fund of over $1 billion. And so when you have that fraction of that amount being paid out into fraud, and then also having legitimate unemployment claims by Kansans who are then turned off because now they become a fraud case. And it's just been a snowball effect, and we're trying to wrap our hands around it. Obviously, we appropriated funds for a new system that's going to take time to put into place. So right now we have to work with what we have. And I would say the best advice I can give to the Department of Labor is please provide customer service for these individuals who are struggling in the state.
And I know those emails that Troy was talking about, we still get them in the newsroom. I'm sure you get them as well. I've heard from lawmakers on both sides of the aisle very frustrated about that.
It is. It's frustrating because as Troy was saying, you do forward that on and you ask to get a follow-up email to let you know the status of things. And it does take some time. But we also know there's a significant number of people that the system is still working with, and they have helped a considerable number. I know that my load for my constituents has dropped quite a bit since the height of everything back in February, when we were really seeing the most of it. But we still have those coming in, and we just keep working with them one at a time to do the best we can to make sure that they get resolved what the needs they have.
Yeah, I do know. I have one gentleman I've been corresponding with for months, and he finally got his payoff in the last week. It was for several months worth, all at once in one check.
Yep.
So yeah, it is starting to come through for some folks. Well, there was another issue that has been a big part of the COVID response. And as we stated at the beginning of the show, just over a third of Kansans are fully vaccinated so far. In a new push to increase the vaccination rate, the governor is pumping nearly $1 million in grants into the efforts. Once again, we go to Rebecca Chung.
The money will be used for doctors across the state to hire dedicated staff members to promote and administer vaccinations. The governor held a roundtable discussion to talk with providers about challenges they face in getting people vaccinated, including vaccine hesitancy. Some out in rural areas say they're lacking technology to get the job done.
A lot of us are out in rural Kansas and we don't have anybody else to ask or any resources other than what we have in our own clinics.
We've got to work with the primary care provider groups to ensure that they have the resources they need to work with their membership and get them all bought in to this concept of get to your doctor and get vaccinated.
One of the jobs workers will be tasked with is enrolling more vaccine providers and helping those struggling to order vaccines. Now that the state of emergency has ended, the governor says the state will have to work harder to meet its vaccination goals. And this is just one of the ways they plan to do that. At the Capitol, I'm Rebecca Chung.
And Troy, as we look at the grants and what they were talking about there, they mentioned issues in rural areas, especially lack of resources. What are you seeing in your district as far as the efforts to get people vaccinated?
I mean, obviously our local health departments are still advocating for individuals to get the vaccinations, whether that be the Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, or Pfizer, whatever the case may be. But they're advocating for as many people in our area of the state to be vaccinated, just like it is for the state of Kansas. As I kind of mentioned before, I think we're at a point right now where if you were going to get vaccinated, you would have been. And I've talked to many people who have told me that they're not going to get vaccinated whatsoever. That's their personal choice. And I just have to acknowledge that. I mean, I can't force them to get a vaccination. The government can't force them to get a vaccination because that's their choice. There's also been individuals that I've spoken to who have said that they had COVID-19, and because of some of the information that's out there is that they won't get it again. Now that might be a falsehood, but at the same time, that's perception is reality. So I think at this level, I mean, obviously putting some more grant money into our local health departments and providers and trying to increase the vaccination rates will help. But at the same time, I'm almost feeling like maybe we've plateaued in regards to vaccines. Not saying that it shouldn't be done. I mean, I'm fully vaccinated. But I know if individuals are going to be wanting to travel, that may be an issue if they aren't shown to be, fully vaccinated.
Yeah, definitely. I know you and I were talking about vacation plans before we started recording. Both involve travel and definitely requires vaccination at this point.
Yes, it does. And a lot of places are asking for proof of vaccination, whether it's a scan of your card or proof of a negative COVID test when you go in. I think one of the fears that I have, especially for rural Kansas, is with these grants, trying to actually get providers to go out there for the time they need to be able to get the people vaccinated. Before, with the emergency order, we know the Kansas National Guard was under orders to take care of that. Matter of fact, my second vaccination was done by the National Guard. And so that was kind of covered. But now it's how do we get those folks that have those skills to be willing to relocate into a rural area to be able to help the people that are out there and make sure that they can get the shots they need. I have friends across the country that are in legislatures, and I have one friend in Virginia. They actually have an open competition between municipalities as to who could hit the 70% mark first. And it's amazing the number of cities they have that are actually hitting that 70%, and yet here we are in Kansas with less than a third.
Well, we're going to look at a couple other topics today because there is other than the pandemic going on. We're going to turn our attention to the rising crime rates. Some police departments right here in Wichita are finding that having more women on the force is helping lower those rates. KAKE's Bree Smith takes a look at why.
While many folks want women to fit the atypical stereotype of police officers, it's what makes them unique that's proven to be important as public needs change.
We've come a long way since pencil skirts and, ticket writing.
Whether it's routine house calls, patrolling neighborhoods, or following up on homicides, women have become pivotal to policing.
We've been more accepted recently, within our male co-workers. They've found us as more of a beneficial than a threat or a detriment.
While stigmas of being the weaker sex still swirl around their careers, Officer Lori Kimry and Detective Anna Hoyt say the traits that make women appear weak are actually strengthening the reach of the department as demand for mental health services and domestic violence calls rise.
It's easier for me to talk into or out of situations maybe than some of my male partners.
Women make tremendous police officers, in many cases better than men, and studies back that up.
The studies come from the 30 by 30 initiative. Departments nationwide and in Wichita have made the pledge to have women make up 30% of the force by 2030. The value: women use less force and less excessive force, are named in fewer complaints and lawsuits, are perceived by communities as more compassionate and honest, see better outcomes for crimes, especially sex crimes, and make fewer discretionary arrests of non-white residents.
So I do think sometimes it's refreshing to victims for me to show that I care or show some emotion, because they sure have with whatever they're going through.
But trust of women on the force isn't just for citizens, it's interdepartmental.
But I think if we all work together, we accomplish goals that maybe wouldn't be if we didn't work together.
In Wichita, Bree Smith, Cake News on your side.
And I know, Stephanie, you and I have both been classroom teachers, and I know when I was in classrooms, it was kind of understood that if you needed to defuse a situation, the women teachers had kind of the upper hand at that.
Well, women are practiced at being nurturing and perhaps lean more on the emotional side of things, which oftentimes what we're seeing with rises of violence is more emotional based than anything. And so the tendency is to talk through the situation, to try to bring the temperature down a little bit, be able to negotiate what needs to be done.
Yeah, and I know here in Wichita, the last recruiting class they actually had more women than men. They're hitting record numbers. Troy, as you look out toward western Kansas, are you seeing an increase in female police officers out there as well?
We are. We're actually seeing a stark increase in the amount of female officers that are joining the police forces in central and western Kansas as well. And I agree with Stephanie. I think in regards to some of the cases or what the particulars might be about that case, it would be more comfortable discussing that with a female officer as opposed to a male officer, especially in cases where it would be like, rape. I mean, that would be one example of where I think the victim would feel more comfortable talking with a female officer as opposed to a male. Also children. I think children who are involved in particular cases have more of an affinity of talking to a female officer, because it's kind of, as Stephanie mentioned, it's more of a nurturing and mothering aspect, and it makes them feel more comfortable. And I think that's why we're seeing an increase of female officers and the demand for those officers in all the police jurisdictions across the state.
Yeah. Well, as we look at the number of police officers, that makes it lower crime rates, makes it more welcoming to folks to come by, and the future of Wichita's iconic Century 2 is one thing that they're hoping will draw more people into Wichita. It remains up in the air, though. This week, one group unveiled its plan again for making the building bigger and better than ever, after taking a year-long COVID pause, that is. Wichitans who turned out for the unveiling loved the idea, but were worried about what they didn't hear. An investment group called Penumbra reintroduced its plans Tuesday to reinvent the Wichita riverfront after a COVID break. They include everything from an indoor water park south of Kellogg all the way north to the Riverside Castle, with one iconic building at the center of the project.
We believe that Century 2 is the heartbeat of downtown.
And they want to keep it that way, saying preserving Century 2 is the purpose of the project. They propose a new state-of-the-art performance center, as well as an international market and other retail shops along the river. In general, the Wichitans who came to hear the pitch liked the idea.
I think this is one of the first ones I've really been excited about.
But they still had questions, a lot of them, about jobs at Century 2.
I was just concerned about whether we're going to shut Century 2 completely down or if something was going to go on.
And the financing.
Is there any foreign money involved in this project?
No.
Penumbra says it's a coalition of investors interested in the city's future and that the project would be 100% privately funded. No asks for city, county, or state support, but never said who the investors are.
Their unwillingness to disclose anything about who their funders are, it just raises the skepticism even higher.
There are a lot of details here that weren't brought up,
I think it's very important that the citizens know who's paying for it.
Developers asking the public to give them time to win their trust.
We've given you a real vision, not a bunch of boxes, and it didn't cost you $750,000 to get that. So please give us a chance. You won't be disappointed.
And of course, the purpose of many of these plans is to attract folks to Wichita, not just entertain Wichitans. So Troy, I'm going to start with you here. Is this the kind of project that would attract folks from your part of the state to come here to the metro area?
Yes, it would. I mean, without a doubt, it would attract individuals from, and in my part of the state, they may prefer to travel to Denver as opposed to Wichita because there's more stuff to do. Obviously, with some of the details that they were outlining out for Century 2, I think that would attract the individuals from Western Kansas to travel to Wichita, just like Union Station did with Science City in Kansas City. Many people from all across the state of Kansas, even from the western part of the state, traveled to Kansas City to go through the exhibits in downtown Kansas City, which, that was kind of the start of the infrastructure rebuild of downtown Kansas City, which then blossomed into the Power and Light District, the Sprint Center, now the T-Mobile Center. Hotels are being built. And I could see the same thing happening in Wichita. And obviously, Intrust Bank Arena was built many years ago. There's been a resurgence in coming back to downtown Wichita. And obviously, something needs to be done with Century 2 to make that an entire tourism package.
Yeah, and yet at the same time, Stephanie, I've talked to so many Wichitans. They love the ideas that are coming out for what to do with the downtown area, whether it's keeping Century 2 or replacing it with something new. But they're also very skeptical. Wichitans have kind of been burned. The Water Walk project, Wild West World, they fear being burned again.
And reasonable fear, because we have seen it happen here a couple of different times. I think that if Penumbra were able to figure out some way to be a little more transparent with the funding, I think that would help considerably. But as an individual who's had the privilege of conducting groups on every stage inside of Century 2, we definitely do need an upgraded performing arts center that would make a difference. But the iconic nature of Century 2, we need to preserve it as much as possible as well, so that it is a part of what identifies Wichita as Wichita.
I've got to say, many Wichita lawmakers I've spoken with have told me something very similar about Century 2, but it is a city decision, not a state decision, so we'll just have to wait and see what the city council decides in the long term. And I want to thank you and Troy both for joining me this week. We hope you've enjoyed our discussion, and we hope to see you both here again. We'd also like to thank our news partners at Cake News, KSN News, and the Wichita Eagle for sharing their materials with us. We'd love to continue our discussion with you on social media. Just look for Pilar Pedraza TV or PBS Kansas on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. But for now, stay safe and have a great week.